this video, I want to explain some of the shortcuts that you can use for the timeline. When you're animating, you're creating frames and keyframes and blank keyframes, and it's not really ideal to have to right-click every single time to access those options and then choose the one that you want. There's a much easier and faster way, but it does depend on how you have your keyboard set up, specifically how you have your function keys set. So for me, for example, my function keys at the top of my keyboard actually don't work. So if I wanted to press F6 or F7, that's actually my brightness, and my F9 and F10 is my volume. So what I've got to do is go into System Preferences, then click on Keyboard, and here I can check the box that says use F1, 2, etc. keys as standard function keys. So with that switched on, I can now go back into Animate, and then if I use F6, I can simply create keyframes just with that click of the button. Similarly, F5 is for a blank frame, or not a blank frame, but a regular frame. So in other words, just it extends to keep the timeline out a bit. If you wanted to extend your timeline out a lot, what you can do is click and drag over a whole bunch of frames like that. If you hit F5 now, that amount of frames that were highlighted will be duplicated or will be added on to your timeline. And then F7 is to insert a blank keyframe. So F6 is for a keyframe, F7 for a blank keyframe, and F5 just to fill out the timeline to add frames. So that's very, very useful and very handy for your workflow. But now I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the actual terminology for animation. So in animation, the terminology is that a keyframe is your main drawing or your main pose within your animation. It's the most important one that you've got. Let's say for now, you could think of it as, say, it's the starting and the ending pose. I will explain in a lot more detail what keyframes are and how to use them to animate. But for now, I wanted to highlight the fact that animators tend to talk about keyframes as being poses or drawings that determine the animation. And just to make things confusing, Animate, the software, calls everything that has a drawing a keyframe. So basically in animation, you've got two keyframes that are filled out by in-between drawings. And in Animate CC, you could have two keyframes that are filled out with other keyframes. Basically, anything that has a drawing on it, Animate is going to call it a keyframe. But because of the software, every time that I'm going to add a new drawing into my animation, I'm going to have to choose Insert Keyframe in order to make that drawing. So just be aware that even though Animate likes to call everything a keyframe, the thing to bear in mind is that a key pose is the main drawing in your animation. This is going to make much more sense when you actually start animating, but for now, I just wanted you to be aware of the common naming conventions that apply to keyframes and in-betweens.